US President Joe Biden delivered full US backing for Israel in person on a solidarity visit in which he blames Islamist militants for a deadly rocket strike on a Gaza hospital. The US President also announced the resumption of urgent aid to the besieged Palestinian enclave. And as Rishi Sunak visits Israel, European intelligence agencies are casting doubt on the hospital strike death toll. A European intelligence official told news agency AFP there weren't 200 or even 500 deaths, more likely between 10 and 50. The official also backed Biden and the Israelis' account, who said the strike at the Christian-run hospital was from a malfunctioning Palestinian rocket. As per the Palestinian Health Ministry, 471 people were killed in the hospital strike. Arab countries have almost universally blamed Israel for the hospital strike, including Egypt, Jordan and UAE. Among the region's few nations that have diplomatic ties with Israel, Iran President Ibrahim Raisi predicted the end of Israel following deadly Gaza hospital explosion. Apart from funding Hamas, Israel's archfoe backs Hezbollah. The Organization of the Islamic Cooperation, a 57-member bloc of Muslim-majority countries, denounced Israel's backers for granting the country impunity in its war. Continuing the conveyor of Western leaders who have visited Israel in the wake of the Hamas attacks, the British Prime Minister will be in Israel to seek de-escalation of the conflict. Rishi Sunak will then travel to West Asian capitals as part of his diplomatic efforts. US President Joe Biden is also eyeing unprecedented aid for Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank as part of a wider $100 billion package that includes support for Ukraine. Gaza, a small territory of about 360 square kilometers, was already experiencing a severe humanitarian crisis before the current hostilities broke out. The Gaza aid move, it's the first crack in a punishing 10-day siege on the Palestinian enclave after the deadliest single attack on Israelis in history. Here's all you need to know. Concerns are mounting about dwindling supplies, warnings of a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. The Rafah crossing, it's the only way in or out of Gaza, not controlled by Israel. The Rafah crossing, it's remained shut during the war as Israel has struck the Palestinian side. Aid is piled up in convoys of trucks waiting in Egypt. Israeli leaders agreed to Biden's request to allow aid into the besieged Gaza Strip via Egypt. The Israeli Prime Minister's office stated the Rafah crossing agreement was limited to food, water and medicine and conditional on it not being used by Hamas. Biden said Egypt president agreed to let up to 20 trucks through initially. The US president added that the shipment would likely not cross until Friday, as the road around this crossing, it requires repairs. UN humanitarian chief Martin Griffiths estimated that about 100 trucks per day were needed to meet the demand in Gaza. Egyptian presidential spokesperson announced the sustainable passage of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip through the Rafah crossing. However, he did not specify a date. Biden said the UN would distribute the aid on the other side and that a second tranche was possible depending on how it goes. But he did warn, if Hamas confiscates, it doesn't let it get through, then it's going to end. And now for more on this, we are being joined by our principal diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibal, who is joining us live from Tel Aviv. Also for more on this, we are being joined by Dr. Avner Cohen, who is a professor of non-proliferation and terrorism studies at the Middlebury Institute. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Siddhant, for joining us as well.
Good evening.
Now, Siddhant, let's start with you. The US president has departed. UK Prime Minister is set to arrive soon. What's the latest on ground?
Well, latest on the ground, what we have seen is the visit of world leaders. The European leaders were here, the German Chancellor was here, the US President was here yesterday in a show of support and solidarity with the Israelis and Israeli government. And today the UK Prime Minister will be traveling. But essentially on the ground, as we have been talking about, the situation remains quite fluid. The big worry for the Israeli government is the release of the hostages, which are still in the custody of Hamas. Now, almost on a daily basis, we know that the family members of these hostages have been holding protests, and they fear for their loved ones and hoping against hope that their loved ones will be released very soon. But even as that happens, we know that Prime Minister Netanyahu is under a lot of pressure to act against Hamas. He has a strongman image, and if he's seen not taking action or being lax, then of course that will be a political suicide for Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Right. Dr. Cohen, coming back to you now, what's your assessment of US President Joe Biden's visit to Israel? Do you think Joe Biden was able to realize his objectives?
Well, I think the objective was to give enormous sense of support to Israel, to show to Israel that it's not alone, given the fact that there is a very fragile situation in the north, and the second frontier, a much more dangerous one, might be open at any moment. He wanted to give a very strong sense of deterrence to the enemies of Israel. And it was a combination of, on the one hand, great deal of support to Israel, but in a sense also some support to Israel from itself. In other words, that giving a sense that you are not alone, you do not need to act against international law. You have to act in a very, according to the rules of laws, and a sense that Israel should not resort to anything beyond that.
Now, sir, the aid deal, that's perhaps the biggest development of this visit. Do you think this will be effectively implemented, and do you think it can be distributed on ground to those in need effectively? The question actually is, who is running Gaza, and how will the aid that's coming in, which whenever it does come in, that be handled?
And I do not have answers to that question. I'm not on the ground. I do not see the situation on the ground. It's a fragile situation. I cannot give you a good answer on that. I hope that some humanitarians aid would be given to the Gaza people. Gaza people do suffer enormously because of the Hamas. The great triumph of Hamas was a defeat for the Gaza people. And I hope that at least the minimum standard of supply would be given to the Gazan residents.
Right. Do stay on with us, sir. Siddhant, coming back to you, same question. How soon can one see the humanitarian aid via the Rafah border coming in, the aid come through?
Well, nobody knows when exactly that is going to happen. Now, we know that the visit of the US President had the positive glimmer of hope. Now, at least it has been agreed that aid will be delivered to Gaza via Egypt, via the Rafah border. But the Israeli side had made it clear that no humanitarian aid is coming from the Israeli side to Gaza unless the hostages are released. And there is some movement on that issue, because remember, that is the biggest concern for the Israeli government, and that perhaps is also the thin line between the Israeli ground offensive in Gaza, because for the safety of 200 Israeli nationals, the Israeli government is reaching out in every possible way, leaving no stone unturned. And almost as we have been speaking about, and we yesterday spoke to number of family members of these hostages, that how they are really concerned. Many of them broke down as well in that protest, and there is in fact a wall here in Tel Aviv where a number of pictures of those kidnapped have been put up. Almost anywhere you go in this city, you will see posters of people kidnapped, and also yellow ribbons, which is a symbol of the hope that these people who have been kidnapped will be returned very soon. So essentially, yes, humanitarian issue for Gaza is the biggest worry globally, but for the people of Israel and for the Israeli government, the biggest worry remains the release of the hostages. And unless the hostages are released, highly unlikely that humanitarian aid will flow from Israel to Gaza. It's up to now Egypt and, of course, how local authorities in Gaza plan for the movement of humanitarian aid. Some trucks have been agreed into, but as the UN has said, that this could be a catastrophe as well.
All right. Dr. Cohen, coming back to you, as Siddhant just mentioned, of course, the hostage situation remains a major concern as well. Another big concern here is that this could turn into a wider conflict and lead to wider instability in the region. What is your assessment on that?
It's a real danger. As we all know, Hezbollah is, as actually it's being stated by the Israeli Minister of Defense today, Hezbollah is 10 times stronger than Hamas. And behind of Hezbollah, there is also the specter of Iran. And we are dealing with the previous correspondent before me. He referred to Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi, as the strong man. Maybe he was at one time. Bibi is now the weakest leader Israel had. And not only that, it's a leader which is suspected, which is hated by many of Israeli residents. He's in a very fragile political situations. There are many, many voices that even calling to depose him before there is a military victory. And therefore, a leader in that kind of situation is himself dangerous, because there are a lot of people who question the soundness of his own decisions. Luckily, right now, he was reinforced by two other senior ministers in his narrow cabinet, in his war cabinet, that were until a few days ago, they were part of the opposition. Minister Gantz and Minister Eisenkot, both of them former chief of staff. And the Israeli hope is that they will give some kind of sanity to a government that already lost the confidence of its own people. Bibi is a dead man, political man walking, and the question is when exactly he would be removed from power. That's the view among many, many Israelis, and there is a great deal of desire to see him out of politics as soon as possible.
Well, Dr. Cohen and Siddhant Sibal, thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Cohen, thank you so much for your perspective on this.
Thank you very much.
Also, thank you, Siddhant, for bringing us the latest. We'll, of course, continue to track all the developments closely. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.